So I would like to introduce our panel members. First, we have Representative Brett Parker.
Yeah.
He is a Kansas State representative for the 29th District and serves on the Kansas Elections Committee. Brett is a strong and vocal proponent for integrity in elections, having introduced an amendment to the Kansas Constitution that would ensure a fair selection process of those in charge of redistricting. Brett also works on behalf of teachers and students, mental health, women's rights. He was born and raised in Johnson County. Representative Parker is a graduate of Olathe East. Today, he works in that very same school district teaching English at Countryside Elementary School and Pioneer Trail Middle School. Next, we have Vignesh Ganapathy. Vignesh works at the ACLU of Kansas as the Director of Public Policy and Racial Justice, and works on the Racial Justice Project. Previously, Vignesh has served in government relations roles with Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases and the Civil Justice Association of California. He is a graduate of the University of California, Santa Cruz, and the University of Pacific McGeorge School of Law, where he studied in a program with Supreme Court Justices Anthony Kennedy and Elena Kagan. In law school, Vignesh focused on administrative and constitutional law, contributing to publications on marriage equality and gender issues more broadly. He also has personal history with and deep passion for criminal justice reform. Next, we have Davis Hammett. Davis is the president and founder of Loud Life, an organization fostering a culture of citizen participation and resistance in the state of Kansas. He is an activist, advocate, educator, and speaker, best known for his international work through Plans and Peace. Davis also was co-creator of the rainbow-colored Equality House across the street from the Westboro Baptist Church. Davis's current work focuses on building democratic community movements and developing critical mass in millennial voter turnout to transform Kansas and hopefully the nation. And finally, we have Reverend Eleanor McCormick. Reverend McCormick became an associate pastor at the United Church of Christ in October of 2014. Reverend McCormick graduated from Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts with a double major in economics and government. While in college, she was on staff with the Appalachian Service Project in Kentucky. She received her Master of Divinity degree from Yale Divinity School and her clinical pastoral education at the West Haven Veterans Hospital in Connecticut. And she studied theology abroad in Germany. Reverend McCormick has a great commitment to green theology, environmental issues, and to social justice. So those are our esteemed panel members today. I'd like to start out, hopefully, with a very quick video that actually Davis Hammett put out a few months ago on voter suppression. And I say I hope because it was a little loud here. We couldn't actually test the sound. So if we don't have sound, then we'll just move on to the questions. And I have some questions that I have prepared to ask our panel members. And feel free during the panel discussion, if you have a question, raise your hand. I will also try to leave some time at the end if you have any questions for our panel members. So let's see if we have sound.
Let's see that.
No. Well, we don't.
Davis, you can just narrate over the thing.
Well, it actually has.
Let's turn around and so you can see it.
What do you think?
That works.
Does it work?
Okay.
It's only a few minutes long.
Okay.
Wow. Wow, that's right.
Yeah.
You want me to see if we can find someone to address the sound issue?
It's only a couple more minutes. We'll be finished. It was just a
Okay.
prelude.
Sorry.
No, that's.
Most of them Republicans too.
Thank you for bearing with us on that. It actually, I encourage you, it's on Facebook and YouTube, I encourage you to go and watch it when Davis is actually narrating it. Great information, but I thought it would be a good way to sort of frame the issue. So with that, Davis, you talk about in your video the SAFE Act and some of the ways that Chris Kobach is trying to make it harder for people to vote by requiring this proof of citizenship. What are other ways that Chris Kobach and other states are doing to disenfranchise voters and making it more difficult for us to cast our vote?
Wow, there's so many.
Yeah.
So there's a couple components to the SAFE Act, which was kind of the crown legislative achievement of Kansas elections under Chris Kobach. One of the factors is voter ID, and this is one that a lot of people are familiar with. Many states have adopted this. One of the major problems with photo ID state issued is part of the problem is elections training. We know that on some of the reservations in Kansas, the first year it was enacted in 2012, people weren't trained to a high enough level that they were actually telling people that their reservation IDs wouldn't work, and so many people didn't vote. So that had, disproportionately discriminated and disenfranchised the Native American community. The other thing is, the most recent research we have along racial lines in photo ID is that 1 in 4 black men in the United States do not have a photo ID. A lot of this is and then people will say like, oh, how can you do that? Well, if you live in a more urban area that has public transit, you don't really have an immediate need to get a driver's license or another photo ID. So we know these things discriminate along economic lines and racial lines. So that's a really widespread one. The proof of citizenship requirement, which is, in my own opinion, the most kind of nefarious in consequences of it. What this did in Kansas is it only applied to new registrants. So this whole case that, oh, undocumented people are voting, so we have to have proof of citizenship to combat that, that argument is void because we didn't require it of everyone. We only required it of new registrants. New registrants are, of course, mostly young people and people who have recently moved into the state. The thing about proof of citizenship, too, is that most people use their birth certificate or passport. With a birth certificate, that's not so easy to get for most folks, and actually it's starting to be viewed as a poll tax. In my own work, I was working with students on Washburn campus. I had called someone on the suspense list. So what they do is they put you on a suspense list if you registered to vote and you hadn't submitted these documents, the proof of citizenship. I called a girl who she moved here when she was very young from California. She didn't have a birth certificate. She didn't know how to get it. She had gone online and tried to find it, but she had all these websites telling her that she could get it from there. She was overwhelmed and she gave up. I told her I was going to call her back, and the next day I did research. I found out there was only one place where she could buy a verified California birth certificate. It was going to cost her $50. I had to explain to her how to fill out the paperwork and that she'd have to go to her bank, assuming she had a bank here, right? Go to a notary to get it notarized, her request. Send that off with $50. Wait several weeks for it to come back. And I asked her, I was like, in several weeks, can I call you back to make sure you completed this? I called her 6 weeks later. She had totally forgotten about it. She had now gotten a birth certificate. And now I had to explain the steps to actually begin the registration process all over again. That was essentially someone having to act as a caseworker just to get one person registered to vote. Also with the proof of citizenship requirement, if that wasn't already bad enough, in 2015, the proof of citizenship took effect in 2013. In 2015, the Secretary of State started deleting voter registrations after 90 days if they hadn't submitted proof of citizenship. So people would actually go to submit their birth certificate, but maybe it's 3 months later and they didn't do it within 90 days. And so the county clerk would get the document and would be like, I don't know what this is. This doesn't match to anyone. And this is, I mean, the same thing with the DMV registrations, etc. We see, and I know that it's going to be discussed more later with the ACLU lawsuit that said DMVs could be, DMV and federal forms could be registered or be processed without proof of citizenship. But what a lot of people aren't aware of is that to this day, if you use the state form or if you register on the Secretary of State's online portal, which regularly crashes, if you use either of those forms, you have 90 days to submit proof of citizenship or you'll be deleted. And through our research, actually in collaboration with the League of Women Voters, which provided us with several suspense lists over the last couple of years, we found over 12,000 people who had been purged and otherwise would have been able to vote in the 2016 election, and nearly 6,000 people that voted with provisional ballots in the 2016 election, their votes weren't counted, and the reason was they weren't registered. So these were likely these people who were registered, they were deleted out of the system, they tried to vote. And this cast doubts across, several of the elections. So that's proof of citizenship. There's other things like lack of access to polls. We've been rapidly reducing polls in mostly low income and communities of color. A polling site reduction on early voting. In Shawnee County now, the only early voting site is out in a wealthy community by the lake and is no longer, there's in the core part of the city where most people are, there's no early voting site. In various states, how they handle felony charges can be different. I'm actually originally from Florida, where once you get a felony charge, you are gone. And about 10% of the population of Florida will never be able to participate in an election. Although they're citizens, they've been off, they dealt with their crimes years and years ago. In Kansas, once you're off the paper though, so once you're released and you're out of parole and probation, you are able to just re-register to vote and reinstate your right to vote. That's a good thing. It could obviously be better. There are some states that allow you to vote, immediately upon release or even while you're going through the process or in jail. There are many of these kind of inconsequence nefarious things that happen from reducing polling sites to creating more burdens that mostly hurt communities of color and low-income folks. That's just a couple of them. One thing that specifically to Lawrence that you might find interesting is, first off, KU has the most in suspense and purged voters in the state, and that we're one of the few states that, when we redistrict, you do that by the census estimates. We actually adjust the census estimates for people in jail and for college students. You should actually have another state representative in this area, but they discount most of your college students and say that they aren't actually living here, and they adjust them out of the population. That happens at both, that would be the case for big universities like KU, Wichita State, Kansas State University. There should actually be more representatives from these places that have big youth populations. So, yeah, I mean, across the board, pretty much anywhere you were looking, if you thought, how could I keep certain groups from voting that I don't want them to vote, that's what's happening in Kansas.
Thank you, Davis. And with respect to the person who has been convicted of a felony and done their time and have served their time, I know from my personal experience with the federal courts, one of the problems is that when the judges are accepting their pleas or sentencing them, the judges say, do you understand that you are going to lose your right to vote? What the judges are not telling these individuals is that once they finish their term, they can then re-register to vote. So many in Kansas who have served their time, they don't know that they can re-register to vote. So huge issue, huge issue. Thank you very much, Davis. Speaking of another way that our voting rights are being disenfranchised is gerrymandering. And Representative Parker, I mentioned in your bio that you have introduced a constitutional amendment that's aimed at taking the politics out of improper redistricting, otherwise known as gerrymandering. Can you explain for the audience what is gerrymandering, why is it a problem, and what is your proposed amendment, and how would that help you fix this issue?
Sure. So the best explanation that I've heard before is gerrymandering is when politicians choose their voters instead of voters choose their politicians. In essence, in Kansas, the legislature draws new district lines after each census, and then they run to represent those districts. So there's always going to be an incentive to create the most beneficial district for yourself personally, or for your party, or for whatever cause it is you're trying to advance. And this, throughout U.S. history, has known, no single party. Whoever is in power has the tendency to try and do this in the way most effective to them. In Kansas, we were basically spared from it the last time because the legislature couldn't agree on a map, and so at the last minute, the courts had to step in, leaned on the legislative research staff, and just kicked out a map, I think the Friday before the Monday filing deadline or something like that. I mean, it was not the ideal timeline, but at least we were spared some of the worst effects of gerrymandering. Now, most, well, in that case, they still, though, drew it, I think, with an intent to try and limit the displacement of incumbents. So you still have a little bit of a legacy of whatever the previous map was before. So it's not perfect. It's not just putting it in the computer and drawing the most logical lines, but a vast improvement over many other states. But there's no guarantee that we're spared that in the future. So I filed a constitutional amendment that would say the legislature gives the final vote, but we have a 5-person panel, 2 people appointed by, one appointed by the Democratic leader in the House, one appointed by the Democratic leader in the Senate, one appointed by the Republican leader in the House, Republican leader in the Senate, and then those 4 have to elect their chairperson as a non-voting member. Any maps that come out have to have 3 votes in favor, so it has to be bipartisan, and then the legislature votes it up or down. It's the Washington state model. There are a number of good ways to go about creating a system that takes the politics out of it. I'm meeting with a group of legislators beginning this week talking about some of these other issues, and redistricting came up. There may be another constitutional amendment that does it, basically saying, hey, last time when the courts did it, that was okay. Let's just make that the plan so we're not doing it at the last minute. That's wonderful too. Any way that takes away the ability for me or anyone else to go, you know what, that precinct's not very good for me. I'm going to put that in the neighboring district, and I'm going to pick up this other one that's more beneficial. I think at the national level, it's estimated that about 15 seats are probably in Republican control as a result of gerrymandering throughout the nation. I mean, that's not far off of the margin to control the House, so it makes a significant difference.
So you are proposing this as a constitutional amendment. Is there a reason why that's the best? And I've heard, and I don't pretend to be well versed, but I've heard that there might be some issues when you bring forth a constitutional amendment because that can sort of open up a can of worms,
Sure.
if you will. So just wondering.
So the reason is that in the Kansas Constitution, it states that the legislature will go about the business of producing these maps. So if you want to interpret that narrowly, you could possibly write it into statute that says the way the legislature is going to do this is to appoint this commission and then vote on the final product. But the cleanest way is just let's make sure the Constitution says what we want it to say. The challenge of it is you have to get 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate to pass it, and then you put it on the ballot for the next election. In this case, that's not that daunting because, at least for the next year, chances are whoever is in the governor's mansion would have vetoed a simple majority bill anyway, so you're going to have to get to 2/3. Constitutional amendments can get tricky because you put them on the ballot, and so sometimes they're used in a way to try and turn out a certain segment of voters, around hot-button issues in Kansas. I would think that this one would be a fairly politically neutral one as far as, trying to drive people to the polls. We had, I think the Supreme Court's hearing a case on it, and several high-profile Republicans were signing on to the brief saying, we would like the court to stop gerrymandering at this level. So it's not strictly partisan, and hopefully we would skirt some of the issues that traditionally come if you have a constitutional amendment about guns or abortion or the traditional ones that we've seen.
Great. Yeah, that case that's going before the Supreme Court is a case from Wisconsin called Gill v. Whitford, and Justice Ginsburg has written that she believes that this is going to be the most important case that the Supreme Court hears the entire term. It's a gerrymandering case, and so it will be interesting to see how the court rules on that this term. Big Nesh. The ACLU, thank goodness, has been leading the fight against Kobach, primarily in Kansas District Court. I was wondering if you could tell us, I know there was some reference to the court cases in Davis's video, but can you tell us, has the ACLU been successful in these cases, and are they still ongoing? Do we expect any significant rulings coming up? Can you just sort of elaborate on the court cases?
Sure. So the short answer to both of your questions is yes, they have been successful, and yes, they are continuing and ongoing. On Fish v. Kobach, that's the case that we've brought to have the voters who register at the DMV be included on the voter rolls. That we were successful on that case at the district court level. It was affirmed by the 10th Circuit, but there is a trial that's set coming up for March 2018 on remand, so it's being brought back down, going to be reheard, and we're optimistic, but again, there's nothing that's guaranteed on that. On the two cases that Davis mentioned in the video that had to do with bifurcated elections, that's whether they're bifurcated between people who register on the federal form versus registering on the state form or online, as well as the case around the bifurcation based on new registrants versus people who had been registered prior. On both of those, we have been successful so far as well. Belenky is the 2013 case that was brought regarding new registrants being having to provide documentary proof of citizenship, whereas old registrants don't. On that, it was found to violate Kansas law, and it's on appeal to the Kansas Appellate Court, but it's currently the ruling is stayed pending the conclusion on some of our federal cases. On Brown, which is we received an injunction against the bifurcated system that prevented the folks on the who had registered at the DMV from being able to vote in state and local elections and in federal ones. We were successful on that as well, and it's also on appeal to the appellate courts, but it's again, stayed pending conclusion of some of our federal cases. The last case that we have ongoing is the League of Women Voters of the U.S. versus Newby. And this is a challenge to Brian Newby's decision to require documentary proof of citizenship on anyone who registers through the DMV and through the federal form. The preliminary injunction was denied by the DC District Court and finally granted by the DC Circuit on September of last year. But again, this is ongoing. It's been remanded to the DC District Court, so stay tuned. But we're very optimistic.
So donate lots of money to the ACLU.
Yeah.
Please.
Find-
Yeah,
It's really dense.
I have a question. I mean, gee, I took judicial process 45 years ago. You guys are younger than that. But when I moved here from Illinois, luckily I kept my eye on the news because I found out, because I couldn't find my passport, I had to make sure I had my birth certificate and my marriage certificate. My question is, if you are just transferring your registration to a different state, isn't there a thing where states have to reciprocate? So why would out-of-state people have to go through that? Luckily, I was living in the place where I got married and where I was born, so it wasn't a hassle. And I got a bunch. But why, I don't understand why Kansas does not reciprocate, at least for the out-of-state transfers.
So historically speaking, every state has the ability to conduct its elections as they choose. But there is something there. I'm not. This hasn't been the basis of our cases so far, just because we haven't had a set of facts that would work for us on that. But there might be something there. There's a full faith and credit clause in the Constitution that provides that the states respect each other's decisions on things like this. So, if the right case comes along, hopefully we can challenge it.
I mean, there was a judge in Texas, a woman, who was denied the right to vote because she still had her driver's license in her maiden name. Or it was in her married name, but she was registered in her maiden name, and a judge was denied the right to vote.
I can tell you 4 years ago when I got married and I changed my name, did not change my address, was a Kansas resident, had been registered in Kansas, and when I went and changed my name and updated my voter registration in Kansas, I was made to prove my citizenship again because I was changing my name, which is one of the reasons that another group that wasn't really mentioned that gets discriminated against based on these laws in Kansas is women. Women are heavily discriminated against because of that as well.
So that's part of the issue here, is that the law currently actually doesn't necessarily discriminate against people from out of state because it applies to people in the state as well. So it's a little bit more difficult for us to bring a case on that.
There is an inequity there, though, in that if you are in the state of Kansas, you are, if the training has been received by the people doing this, if you request your birth certificate for the purpose of registering to vote, they are supposed to waive the fee for you.
Right.
But if you're from out of state, there's no agreement on that, and there's different costs in different states. So even as detrimental to youth voting, and most youth being born in Kansas, as Davis's video showed, it's another layer if you are actually moving from out of state, and then you have to use your own money to pay to be registered to vote.
Except in Douglas County.
Right.
And
Yeah.
there is an affidavit too, so this is why you should also use the federal form, right, because it bypasses a lot of these problems. But how the SAFE Act set itself up is that women actually, anyone who takes their spouse's last name, which is about 17,000 people a year in Kansas, they have to submit an additional affidavit explaining why their photo ID and their birth certificate will not match the last name. So, I mean, as you can imagine, that's, questions of sex discrimination there.
I think we have a couple here.
Sorry.
In 2012, I was renewing my non-driver's ID and it took over 4 hours at the DMV. And I am concerned about the effects of people with disabilities on their ability to get ID through the DMV, because in many, if they live in rural areas, they might not be able to get to the DMV.
Exactly.
Yeah, lots and lots of barriers. I see a couple of hands. Let me get one more question in, and then we'll keep things moving, and then I'll get over to you. I would like to hear from Reverend McCormick. We've been talking about all these efforts at voter suppression and making it harder for us to participate in the democratic process. Can you tell us, do these, I think we know the answer, but do these voter suppression efforts disproportionately impact particular categories of people, and does this then impact who ends up getting elected?
Yes.
That was a softball.
And I probably been there. And I realize that I have differing expertise from our esteemed panel members, but I think that question comes at a perfect moment in our conversation this morning, responding to the gentleman who just spoke about his experience at the DMV. I serve Plymouth Congregational Church, which is, to no one's surprise, a majority white congregation that is seriously and intentionally examining its white privilege and what that means and looks like out of our faith narrative. That said, our congregation is socioeconomically diverse and is diverse when we look at classes of folks that may be able-bodied or less able-bodied, those who may be poor, those who may be wealthy. And so I can speak to this, yes, I believe, because I'm seeing more and more so within my own context that 3 of these ways that voter suppression affects folks is affecting my folks directly. We've spoken about restrictions in terms of registration, what kinds of specific IDs you may need or be called upon to produce. And we've touched upon how that affects university students in particular, a number of whom sit in my pews. But where I'm really seeing the rubber hit the ground is in intimidation and in fear, right? Fear is a word that pastors spend a lot of time on. And fear, in the case of voter suppression and voter gerrymandering, I think kind of has a two-tone or two-branch effect. First, you may not vote or you may not take all those steps to guarantee registration if you are fearful that your vote will be diminished or diluted due to gerrymandering, right? It's that whole apathy, but it's apathy that comes out of legitimate fears. Does that make sense, right? And then there's the fear of being intimidated when you do try to vote, whether that is in your own clerk's office or you get as far as a polling station and you feel like what's happening in a parking lot, or as you are approaching the doors to a polling place, you get that feeling of fear, of intimidation, right? All of those things matter when we talk about voting being a right. And so I would say yes, an unequivocal yes. And I also feel that we need to truly pay attention to some of those words that were already raised this morning, rules like inconvenience. If something is a right, I believe we should be working diligently to make this the most convenient thing we have, right? Convenience needs to be the imperative if this is to be honored as a right. And I see too many of those in my faith community, and I've talked to too many leaders in other faith communities who are saying my folks are stretched so thin that any inconvenience that you can enact or instill is enough of an inconvenience to revoke someone's right.
Wow, powerful. Thank you. Thank you. Did you want to say something? Yes.
Yes, a couple of things really. When I moved here this spring from Arkansas to get my Kansas driver's license, I had my birth certificate, but I had to drive to Topeka and get my marriage license because my name was different than on mine, which to me, so now I'm hearing this kind of stuff, but was this really to get a driver's license or is it something to do with voting?
Both.
Well, it's what we're beginning to learn. The other thing, if we really, really want everybody to vote, my question to everybody, what is the people in the state of Kansas going to do about making sure that we have open primaries?
I want to make sure everybody knows that when we're doing Facebook Live, please repeat the question or get a microphone so that those watching at home know what we're talking about. I don't know if we have an extra mic or not, but if we can repeat the
That
question.
is my bad. I was asked to repeat the questions and I
It's
have
okay.
not done that one time.
Okay,
So
thank
my
you
apologies.
very
My
much.
apologies. Yes.
I'm thinking that if you're looking for legal opportunities, the ADA, with people with both disabilities and our growing aging population with frailty and eventual probable disabilities, having difficulty getting all of the paperwork done, that you've got the federally mandated ADA to look at.
Thank you. So the comment was that the Americans with Disabilities Act might provide some mechanisms to help those who have disabilities
And aging.
overcome some of these voting barriers. Thank you. All right, Davis, now you are the founder of Loud Light, an organization that at least currently is focusing on millennial voters, getting the vote out. What sort of things is your organization doing to get these young voters out?
Or just to follow up really fast on the Reverend's comment of fear, one other problem we face in addition to that in Kansas is confusion with these ongoing lawsuits. And this will kind of lead into my work on college campuses is usually when I'm just trying to register someone to vote, I have to explain the status of various lawsuits because they're like, wait, I've heard this and this and this. And a lot of people become overwhelmed by that, again, and just choose to stay home because they're scared or they're confused or they don't feel informed. So I had done, I've done activism pretty much my entire life, and I came here to Kansas to work on activism across from the hate group and on particularly LGBT rights and other things. And then I was kind of surprised because there seemed like this huge disconnect between the politics of the state and the people of the state. And when I started looking into the data of it, that's when I found, as you saw in that kind of first chart, these really huge gaps in certain populations participating in Kansas elections. And Kansas is actually one of the bottom 5 states for youth civic participation. And so I kind of started brainstorming what would it look like to try to engage these populations. I moved to Kansas when I was 22, I'm 27 now, so I started this when I was like 25. And I have 3 pillars of that. One is this direct voter engagement. So I work with people when we go onto college campuses. I actually will teach some classes on college campuses about how to have an impact, right? To get young people to think more locally. A lot of people, young folks on campus will tell me, my vote doesn't matter. For example, in the 2016 election, before that, my vote doesn't matter. And I'll just tell them, frankly, your vote's not gonna matter for president in the 2016 election in Kansas. It's just not. But your state representative in this area was won by close margins. They set your tuition. They're gonna decide how much debt you're in for the rest of your life. Does that matter to you? And trying to bring those issues more locally. You're talking about affordable housing issues in Lawrence. Engaging young folks in those issues that are more personal and they can more their vote can have a bigger impact on, I think is key to getting young people civically engaged. So that direct engagement. The other thing is digestible information. It's unfortunate that a lot of the newspapers and media has been more and more consolidated and owned by big conglomerates, and it's just national news and not really local news. Plus, local news stations have had their budgets just cut and cut, so they're struggling just to keep up with the day-to-day. But that format doesn't really work for a lot of young folks and just a lot of folks these days. They need quick, poignant information. So this session, I started making these weekly recap videos of state politics, 3-minute videos that said kind of key things that happened in the State House. That started engaging people in kind of a new format, and to my surprise, people started showing up at committee meetings and even speaking out in them and would tell me they heard about it, that it was coming up in videos that I was putting out. I did a long video, or like a 9-minute video explaining the Kansas budget crisis and how we're actually $20 billion in debt and all these details to it that got over 200,000 views. And to my surprise, a lot of those were actually young millennial folks that were engaging in it. And one of the big things about when people talk about millennials, like what makes them, millennials or whatever, I think it's this overwhelming, and pardon me for cussing, but like the resistance to bullshit. They want to, I think young people want to hear it straight. They want to hear exactly how screwed the system is, what the issue is, and how they can actually have an impact. And if you tell it to them straight and don't make it all lofty, like, we're all going to dream together, we're going to get the perfect president, we're going to save the world. If you give it really straight, like, you can show up to vote and maybe we can get a new affordable housing building and that will, help some of the folks get off the street, that becomes more real. And the third thing is building coalitions. So across the state, when I arrived here in the very beginning of 2013, very fractured geographically and across issues. And I started building bonds between, teachers and teachers unions and LGBT activists and then environmental activists, and trying to get us to show up more and more for each other. Last year we created the Kansas People's Agenda, had nearly 1,000 people show up the day after the governor's state of the state, and we had essentially the people's state of the state. And we were like, we're uniting across these divides, we're going to build power, we're going to lock arm in arm to be like, we want these issues, we want people's struggles to be a priority in this building. By the way, January 10th, we're also going to do that again at the people's state of the state following the governor's state of the state. So those kind of pillars are all around engaging people at a new level that feels like their politics are personal and that they're personally being heard.
Excellent. Thank you for your awesome updates. Thank you. Kind of dovetailing on that, Representative Parker, you teach elementary and middle school in Olathe, and as we know, millennial voter turnout is pretty dismal. With your experience in teaching these young middle school, do you have any thoughts as to why there's such apathy, and do you have any sort of insights as to maybe, Davis has mentioned some things that he's doing, but do you have some insights that you've seen that might be sort of causing some of this just we don't care kind of atmosphere?
Well, I think we've talked about a number of the things that just disproportionately affect new young voters, or making the process daunting, impossible in some cases, confusing. If you think that your trip to the DMV, which may take 4 hours, may not end in actually accomplishing what you want, you're a lot less likely to do it. I like a lot of things about my generation, but we're also one who, like, the act of answering the phone seems daunting to us. We'd rather you just text us, right? So like 4 hours at the DMV is a significant barrier. But I think on the other side, especially in Kansas, until this last session, we've just been trying to play defense and preserve good things that we already have and wish we could take for granted. I think if you're a 19-year-old, that's hard to get excited about because you've never known anything different. I think when we start putting things in terms of, hey, we could lower college tuition if this, or in positive policy terms, right? If we were talking about, like, there's a growing bipartisan consensus around making community college free or close to free, those are kinds of things that get 18, 19, 25-year-olds engaged, things that they can aspire to or casting a vision. So I think part of that's on people like me who are running for office and putting those visions out there, and part of it's just, I think, hopefully as we put the pieces back together in Kansas, and there's still a long way to go, and as Davis's budget video attests to, there's a lot of hidden debt that we're still going to be paying off in the future. We may be able to have room for casting sort of that more positive long-term vision of not just how do we keep this from being chipped away at, but how do we create a future that you want to buy into and that you would be excited about.
Good insights, good insights. Big Nash, in addition to fighting KOBOC on the legal front, what efforts are there things in the future that the ACLU is looking to do and accomplish on the issue of voter suppression?
Absolutely, thank you. As you all heard regarding the lawsuits, it's a lot of dense material. You know, it's not the most easily accessible for everyone. So Davis and Brett both mentioned the rate at which people feel confused and intimidated by the system. So it's more important, I think, to look at this in terms of what are we working towards? What are elections going to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now? You know, we want a society in which young people feel empowered and emboldened and able to go to the polls and are not inundated by a sense of being unable to participate. So in terms of the work that we're doing, we're trying to support our allies in and around the legislature. Representative Parker, Representative Heiberger is here as well, and other elected officials. You know, your esteemed county clerk is here in the back, and he could probably wave to everyone right now. And Senator Francisco is here as well. And these are all people that, you know, it's one, you know, us speaking to you about these issues is the first step. The second step is for all of you to reach out to your elected officials and talk about how we need to reform the SAFE Act, but also look toward empowering more people to take part in elections. So in order to serve that end, we are hosting an event on October 1st. I know you all have a lot coming up this coming Sunday, but the Sunday after that, we will be hosting a launch for our campaign on citizen engagement in elections. And this will be taking place over at the Lead Center, so I urge all of you to please be there. You can register online at peoplepower.org, but this event's going to be our opportunity to really call on the State House and our elected officials to take action on this and to make sure that not only are we protecting the right to vote from further infringement, but that we also are able to chip away at the documentary proof of citizenship requirements that's hurt so many of the people in our communities, but also be able to move toward same-day voter registration, toward advanced voting, toward permanent vote-by-mail status. You know, no person should have to choose between going to work and going to the polls. And what we're seeing in this country is effort to make us have to choose, and no one should have to make that choice.
Very good. And I put a slide up for you if you, so.
Oh, great.
Yeah, please. The ACLU of Kansas and their national people are coming in as well, and we really want to fill up the Lead Center, and the Lead Center's big, so please RSVP and show up to that event. I know my student group will be doing lots of volunteering that day, so does somebody have a question?
I have a question for Eleanor. In your work with congregational leaders, what is a quality or personality trait that you see that makes someone an effective leader?
So the question is, in your work, what characteristics, in your view, make an effective leader?
Reverend Rose, I think we are on parallel thought tracks because I was asking myself a similar question. I think one of the greatest gifts I myself as a faith leader and other leaders within faith communities might be able to provide in this specific moment as we look at specific issues around voter suppression are our skills, training, and abilities around translation. As both of you were speaking, I heard you saying, and Davis as well. You know, these laws, these lawsuits, these guidelines, they are confusing, overwhelming. Where do you start, right? Are you sure you've gotten it right? These are the same things folks tell me about the Bible, right? I mean, I'm seeing Musa here. Same thing, right? You hear from your community, how do I open this part of the Quran? How do I look at that part of the Torah? And if we're doing our jobs well as faith leaders, we invite and encourage and we give our people the tools they need to get through that gray, right? Or to get through those barriers. And so I think to be translators is a unique gift we can lead with, so to speak. And I also believe that, at least in my faith tradition, with the teacher that I have chosen to follow, Jesus, that his way is a way that says, stand up when the least of these are not being heard, right? So we can lead with our bodies and we can lead with our feet because we are called to do that, to step into these hard spaces and to speak for the least of these across faith traditions.
So do you believe that civil disobedience is a tactic that the clergy should use in fighting for social justice? Not to solve
I do. I do. And I speak for myself. I am not here speaking for my faith community as a whole or as Christianity writ large. I am here to say, yes, I do believe that civil disobedience can be, and has been historically very effective in addressing issues such as those that we are facing in our state and in our country. And I am personally prepared and, in fact, preparing to engage in civil disobedience, in part through partnerships with organizations that are here today, and in part through the modeling and the prophetic witness of Reverend William J. Barber II, who is leading a moral revival in our country, who is breathing a new life into Martin Luther King Jr.'s Poor People's Campaign. A pastor and a leader who has very intentionally focused on our beloved state of Kansas and is seeking not only clergy but also laity to engage in civil disobedience. I don't think civil disobedience is the only tool in our toolbox, nor should it be the first that we reach for. But my faith does, in fact, compel me to be engaged in social justice. And for me, at times, social justice looks like embodied justice. Looks like risking something in hopes of that risk being vindicated. And if you want to look at places where that is, in fact, working, I again refer to you, Reverend William Barber's name, his campaigns, his work in North Carolina, where civil disobedience and that risk truly did vindicate, right? There were real results. Unjust laws were taken into the federal court and were struck down.
Very good. Yes.
I have one question for Davis. You were talking about coalitions and working together. I'm aware of a group called the Big Tent Coalition. Do you work with that group?
I've shown up for their events.
Hold on. If I can repeat the question.
Yeah.
The question was, in your coalition working and building, have you heard of or worked with Big Tent?
So this is Big Tent it's healthcare issues, right? Yeah, healthcare and disability issues. So I am aware of them. I've shown up for several of their events. They're also aware of when I said the People's Campaign, or sorry, now I'm getting a couple coalitions mixed up. The Kansas People's Agenda is actually, by the way, it's not like Loud Lights thing, it's no one's thing. It was, we started meeting with hundreds of people across the state talking about key issues, and then we showed up and we had this rally raising up voices of just people and their struggles and talking about how we want these to be, forefront of making public policy. So several members who are a part of that and helped lead the Big Tent Coalition were also part of the discussion of the Kansas People's Agenda. What I've realized too is once you make that connection, most people are excited and willing to work together, and I really do feel like over the last couple of years there's this beautiful kind of like organic developing relationship that are all these very personal relationships where it's, everyone up here I know personally too, because we've done work along the way, and these relationships centered in justice that are happening across different organizations in Kansas over the last couple of years are really exciting. Like there's a really grassroots, beautiful force that's kind of forming.
Yes, Marcy.
Clearly, the idea of motor voter and registering at the DMV was to make the process easier for everybody. At the same time, the federal government has put requirements on states to meet Real ID. How is Real ID going to further confuse this opportunity to register to vote because of the requirements for producing citizenship papers?
I can try and take this. So the question that was asked was about how Real ID and the implementation process is related to people's abilities to vote. So far it has not been an issue, generally because IDs are not proof of citizenship. And every state runs its own elections. So our neighbors in Missouri, for example, who do not have Real ID compliant IDs, they'll still be able to vote in Missouri elections. And if they wanted to, if someone moved from Missouri to Kansas, they would have to bring their citizenship paperwork, not their ID with them. So Real ID compliance isn't necessarily an issue there. Some of the broader conversation around it, and the reason why states have not adopted it immediately or have wanted to take some time to do it, is, it's a noble concern. It has to do with people's privacy generally and federal collection of that data. So that's a different conversation. It's a loaded one, but when it comes to your ability to register and vote, it's not related.
Do you have a question?
Actually, it's more of a comment. I want to thank you guys for picking Lawrence as your kickoff place for this this campaign. Couldn't have picked a more supportive community. Jamie Shue's here, right?
Yep.
Just want to brag a little bit about the League of Women Voters, what we did last week, with the help of Jamie Shue and the Kansas League co-president. We had a training session with probation officers at the Public Works Building with the immense support of the Director of Reentry there. And we're going to hopefully continue that progress to get ex-felons re-registered.
Awesome. Very good.
I just wanted to add one more thing to what Lily said, and it hadn't been discussed earlier. You mentioned earlier the intimidation factor. One piece of information that we're not paying enough attention to is that one case of the voter that was successfully prosecuted for voting when she was not a citizen was an immigrant, and she was actually, the reason she registered initially was because while she was getting a driver's license, the employee at the DMV asked her, do you want to register to vote? And she said, am I eligible? He said, it's up to you. So she checked it off. And later on, she was held legally liable and she losing her citizenship status. And the only way you discovered it, by the way, is when she actually became a citizen, she checked to register to vote as a citizen. And when you went to register, they found her name already there. That's how she came to life. So right now in the immigrant community, the people who are now citizens from immigrant background, they are very afraid to try to register because they are afraid of the legal implications that may affect the immigrant status later. And that is really suppressing their desire to register to vote. And something needs to be done about that.
Can you repeat that? I was having trouble hearing what you said, I'm sorry.
Well, the point was is that one of the few who have been prosecuted for illegal voting, as for voting or registering to vote when she shouldn't have, wasn't warned by the DMV that she shouldn't. The DMV person said, "Oh, do you want to register to vote?" and didn't say that, didn't suggest that maybe she shouldn't, and she was confused. And so the problem going forward is that now that she's been prosecuted, the problem is that that is actually making those who are new citizens and immigrants who are becoming citizens, they're more fearful because look what happened to her. She was sort of wrongly lulled into registering to vote, which she shouldn't have, and so it's actually that in and of itself is suppressing the vote.
I was just going to mention on that too. So of the 9 cases that were found, all of them follow this narrative of they weren't people acting as bad actors, they were people who had bad information or dealt with people who weren't trained. So these poll workers that weren't trained how to handle the cases. And that's what we see across the board whenever they find these cases of voter fraud. It's usually just a citizen who didn't have good information. And that's an important note that we don't have these bad actors on the citizen side mostly. You can question if there's bad actors on the government side, enforcement side, but we don't see that in these cases being pursued.
And in a way, returning to Reverend Rose's question about leadership and how we can be better leaders, I hear time and time again that I am being too political as a pastor, right? But being nonpartisan, right, is really, really the linchpin here. You can be political as a pastor. In fact, I believe you should be. I believe Jesus Christ was, to a degree I'm not even willing to risk, right? But that said, we are legally allowed to partner with the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan organization. Churches, synagogues, and mosques and fellowship halls are allowed to partner with the ACLU, a nonpartisan organization. We need our lay leaders and our clergy to make these partnerships explicit before the 2020 census happens, before the next election rolls around. We need to be sure that we are offering our huge buildings, right? Our resources of expertise and education to train those poll workers. The list goes on. We can lead in that way. Most major denominations also have Get Out the Vote kits. Anyone can go onto any one of these denominational websites and download a Get Out the Vote kit. Point by point is going to walk you through ways in which you can be more involved in seeing that everyone has an equal right to vote.
With that, our time is up. Why don't we give our panel members